Lee Summit is your destination for big city vibes and small town charm.
Head to the downtown Lee Summit Farmers Market, where local meets fresh. Then grab a cup of coffee and discover a variety of shops and boutiques just around the corner. Continue the fun in downtown Lee Summit at a retro arcade bar. Discover your new beer at one of our 6 locally owned breweries. Cool off with some handcrafted cocktails at happy hour. End the night with live music and good company. Lee Summit, Missouri.
Welcome to the Lee Summit Sign Department. We are going to walk you through our process from start to finish. We make signs as needed here. It's not like we just go out into the field and place a speed limit sign here, no parking here. Our traffic engineers, they go through and they'll do field studies. They'll send us down an engineering work order for us to go out, place new signs or remove signs as needed. Coming from the material, our blanks come in and they're just aluminum blanks. We can put our white, our red, our fluorescent yellow, green, whatever. And basically what it looks like is just that there. Throw it up into the roller. And once we got it covered, take it to our work table here, and Tim will cut the corners, cut all the access off to where it's lined up right. As far as the plotter and the software that we use, there's a street name sign there, and he's gonna go ahead and print that out on the plotter so you can see the plotter and how it operates and runs. There's standards for the height, even just on letters on the sign blank. Basically what we have on the computer there is it's pretty much set up to those. And it goes through, it's got a very small but sharp needle that goes through and cuts everything out, letter by letter. Once that's done cutting, our next stage would be bringing it over here. Currently picking out the sign letters right now. We call it weeding or picking or however you want to call it. Next, putting it on the transfer tape. Then after it's taped, we bring it over to the roller. That's where we apply it to the actual sign blank. And we'll roll it through one time just to get the air bubbles out. And the last stage is basically just taking the transfer tape off the front of it. And there's a finished product of the street name sign. We'll take you out to the field and show you our process that we go through. We're gonna go out and follow our sign guys, get something installed for you. This is where we check our underground utilities. Tim, you got AT&T?
AT&T's back here.
Evergy, Google, so we should be good to go. We normally put all of our stuff together out in the field. Then once the base is installed, we'll go ahead and put the post in there. We've come up to perfect. And that's how we do it. Simple, quick.
You're invited to discover summer fun. Ride the waves in the wave pool. Jump off the diving boards. Take a dip in the Action River. And slide down the slides at our outdoor water park, Summit Waves. After a day in the sun, experience downtown Lee Summit. Enjoy gourmet pizza and delicious food for lunch. Then, cool down with handcrafted ice cream right around the corner. Summer at the Summit, Lee Summit, Missouri.
Traditionally, we think as police officers, those responding to law enforcement needs within the community. But honestly, we are there to serve our citizens, and our citizens do go into crisis. They do have mental health crises, and we're being called to those scenes on a regular basis. In order to help serve those citizens better, we did initiate the Crisis Intervention Team Program. These are officers that are specially trained to de-escalate crisis situations. Recently, we've brought co-responders onto the scene, licensed qualified mental health professionals housed within our police department, and they respond with those officers directly to those scenes where a crisis is occurring so they can interact with that citizen and get them the help they need right there on that scene.
The co-responders are either bachelor or master level in a behavioral health related field. They wear plain clothes, they don't carry weapons or anything like that.
I have a police radio that I listen to all day. Listen for, those key words: mental health, behavioral health, crisis.
There's a lot of officers that just call for me. I have my own radio number.
I also have the ability to self-dispatch to them and say 982 is en route.
Officers en route, 914, Armstrong.
So typically I arrive after they've made it safe. I'll make contact and get kind of the rundown, and then I just kind of jump right in.
Like, hey, my name's Allison. I'm a mental health professional. I'm here to help you. I'm not here to take you to jail or arrest you.
Sometimes all a person needs is a voice, someone neutral, someone outside that, can listen. I do a lot of safety planning, including family, their support network, who's close to you. If they're home alone, who can come over and hang out with you today? Can we lock away your sharps? Can we put up your meds? Do you need meds? Can we get you over to the urgent care to get you assessed for your medications? Some of them also are like, oh, I'm so glad you came. This made me feel so much better.
Our main goal as co-responders is to, one, get people connected to the services that they need, and also divert from emergency rooms and jails.
And they almost get a different view of the police responding. That lets me know you care and the officers care.
Please, please, how can we help you?
My husband has...
In 2020, we had 722 mental health related calls for service. 2022, by that time, 1,479. These mental health related calls for service are increasing. How we're responding to that is increasing the number of crisis intervention team officers we have available, as well as the number of co-responders we have available to respond on these calls.
So what I think is important for the community to know about the co-responder program is that we're here, we exist. All you have to do when you call 911 is ask for us. Say, hey, I want a co-responder to respond to this crisis, and we'll go. I was really struggling about 8 years ago on my personal journey with mental health, and I met some amazing social workers and amazing programs that have helped me get to where I am today. I really couldn't see myself doing anything else. We want to help, and that's what we love to do.
So I had a client, we got a call, she had some suicidal ideations, and she really felt that she had nobody. And and getting to know her story and getting to know who comes around and sees you, well, then we found a support person, and they responded immediately. And we made a plan. I called back and checked on her in an hour, and then I checked on her in 2 hours. We were able to get her into the additional services to where she talks to someone every week or more. I just took a person that really just thought they had nobody and nobody would show up for them, and show them you do. And you'll be amazed who is in your corner if you just simply say, I need a little help.
Lee Summit has you covered for all of your summer fun. Head to the downtown Lee Summit Farmers Market, where local meets fresh. Then grab a cup of coffee and discover a variety of shops and boutiques just around the corner. Continue the fun in downtown Lee Summit at a retro arcade bar. Discover your new beer at one of our 6 locally owned breweries. Cool off with some handcrafted cocktails at happy hour. End the night with live music and good company. Summer at the Summit, Lee Summit, Missouri.
Councilmember Hodges.
Thank you. I love where you guys are coming from. You're local and you're all kind of coming together. But where I'm struggling with from the last time that we talked about this, I think it was maybe October.
I actually grew up in my district. We moved here my sophomore year in high school. My parents still live in the same house, and I just went through high school here and then have stayed in Lee Summit ever since. The neighborhood that my parents live in is Canterbury. My favorite thing, and I still do to this day, is I love to go running. They have the best sidewalks. I feel like you can go for days. So now I still get to do that. Since I live not too far from them, I get to use those same routes that I took during high school, and it's just fun. All right, let's see it, Jess. Come on. We're a big soccer family. I love sports, I love to watch sports, and it's even more fun to watch sports when my kids are in it. I coach my middle daughter Josie's team. I have since kindergarten. We do the basketball, we do softball, we're gonna do volleyball. And it's just so much fun. Hi, Faith Hodges. Do solemnly swear. Do solemnly swear. That I possess the qualities. Something that I would like to accomplish while on city council is to get more family activities here. You know, I don't want to have to be driving my family to, say, the Kansas side or any other city but my own. And I want to be able to invest in our city and make family memories in our city.
Open the public hearing in the matter of K1 Speed, Diventures,
Crack Shack, Blue Jeans Golf.
Councilmember Hodges.
I just want to say thank you for bringing us to Lee Summit, because I grew up at this. My grandpa would take us there, so I'm excited that now I have to take my kids there.
Bill number 23-0, pre-construction services for the Downtown Market Plaza project.
I'm just as excited as everybody else about the downtown marketplace. I'm extremely excited about the community that it's going to bring, bringing more family things to do to the city and right in the heart of it.
When you presented the numbers, the first time you came to us, it was 25.5%, and then
you know, people were like, oh, you know, being on council, it's not a lot of work, not a lot of... I think it was a bit of a surprise when there's so much info that you realize you just don't know. Even something as simple as sidewalks. It's like you don't realize how much goes into something like that. After a couple months, I'm like, okay, I'm finally, you know, catching the groove of how things work, learning new things, but also feel like I've got some things under my belt as well. It's been a great experience so far.
Good afternoon. All right. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Finance and Budget Committee. Can we get a roll call, please?
Here.
Here.
Chair Shields.
Here. All other members of the committee are absent today.
Oh, I'm sorry. Chair, Vice Chair Lovell's absent and Mayor Pro Tem Lopez are absent.
Thank you. All right. First item on our agenda is approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion?
Chair. I move to approve the Finance and Budget Committee agenda as presented.
Second. Thank you. We have a motion to approve the agenda with a second. Can we get a roll call vote on that? Aye.
Councilmember Edson. Aye. Chair Shields.
Aye. All right. Do we have any public comments today? Is your mic on? I'm just having a little trouble.
Sorry.
hearing.
None have been received by the clerk's office and no one is here in person.
Okay. All right, next item on our agenda is 5A 2023-5755, approval of the June 5th, 2023 action letter.
Chair, I move for the approval of the June 5th, 2023 Finance and Budget Committee action letter.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Councilmember Hodges, second by Councilmember Edson. Can we get a vote on that as well?
Councilmember Hodges.
Aye.
Councilmember Edson. Aye. Chair Shields.
Aye. Well, that passes. Okay, next item is TMP 2734, an ordinance approving a sole source agreement in the form of a purchase order between the City of Lee Summit and ASAP Off-Road Specialty Vehicles, Inc. for the purchase of an advanced life support utility vehicle in the amount of $89,922 and authorizing the city manager to execute the same buy-in on behalf of the city. Mr. Osterman?
Yep. Thank you, Chair, Committee. My name is Brian Osterman, Deputy Chief with the Fire Department. So what this request is something a little different for the Fire Department. We don't currently have anything like this, just like this in our fleet anyway. What this item would do for us, what this resource would allow us to do is respond to incidents in specialty type areas or scenarios in a way that we currently can't. Whether it be a downtown event or if someone is in one of the trail networks or off-road, we have a pretty limited capability now to respond to those scenes and treat those patients with the same degree of confidentiality and those best practices that we're able to in other situations, such as in home or out in the public eye especially. We do have a resource now, but if we have to haul a patient from a congested area out in the public eye back to one of our units, there's no confidentiality that we can perform or provide for that patient. So what this vehicle is, it's basically it's a UTV with a patient compartment on the back that allow us to respond off-road. We can have a downtown for these larger events that we have a few times a year or throughout the city. It can be deployed to wherever those areas are. So if there is an incident, we can respond and provide the same level of care that we would in any other. This was approved through procurement with a sole source. There's really only one company that provides everything we needed that we wanted to spec into this vehicle. So it was a sole source agreement, and the price listed there is what the quote was. This was budgeted within the public safety sales tax budget. There was a little bit of a variance on price from when we first looked at this and formulated the budgets to now. But those are things that we're going to track and keep an eye on as we move forward with PSST purchases. And there's some will come in higher, some will be lower. With those, any big variances we're going to manage in the out years of PSST to keep balanced.
Do we have any questions?
Thank you. So the 89,000 is for one.
For one, that's correct.
Wanted to be clear on that, right?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. No, I think that's an excellent use. I actually had somebody ask me about this several months ago. They were asking in regards to downtown days, and with all the trails we have that go through the parks, this is an excellent idea. So I think that's great. I would look at $10,000. That's what a gator is, This probably has a little more bells and whistles than a gator.
Yeah, it's basically a mini ambulance.
Yeah.
It has all the same functionality of one of our larger ambulances, just in a much smaller package.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're not going to take it on the highways. We're going to get them back and, put them in one of our ambulances and continue. It's a very functional vehicle for sure.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
And I do have just one question. So this won't require any additional manpower. It's not like an ambulance where you have to staff up a new crew. This would just be for special events and as needed. Is that right?
Correct. We typically staff, like for the downtown days, for Oktoberfest, for the larger events, we have staffing that we pull back in anyway, just for coverage, for a lot of public relations events. If this was to be deployed outside of one of those, scheduled events, we would be using typically on-duty staffing. Now, we may recall for those positions if we had to send someone out to deploy this, but this is the same model we use now for any other specialty resources, like our grass rigs or brush trucks. If we have to send those out, we typically recall and backfill those positions when we need to.
Questions?
Chair? I would move to recommend to council for approval TMP-2734, an ordinance approving a sole source agreement in form of a purchase order between the City of Lee Summit and ASAP Off-Road Specialty Vehicles, Inc. for the purchase of an advanced life support utility vehicle in the amount of $89,922 and authorizing the city manager to execute the same by and on behalf of the city.
Second. Thank you. I have a motion by Councilmember Edson, second by Councilmember Hodges. Can we get a roll call vote, please?
For Councilmember Edson?
Aye.
Councilmember Hodges?
Aye.
Chair Shields?
Aye. All right. Next item is TMP 2746, an ordinance approving the award of RFQ 2023-50 for emergency dispatch software in the amount of $179,557 and ratifying the city manager's execution of the same for all related and necessary documents. Deputy Chief Todd?
Good afternoon, Chair and Committee. RB Todd, Deputy Chief, Fire Department. Currently, when you call 911 and it gets to the Fire Department Communications Center, we go through what's called emergency medical dispatching. So it gives individuals instructions on CPR and other medically needed advice until we arrive on scene. Currently, we have flip cards in dispatch. Those are outdated and are no longer supported. The company we use is Priority One Dispatch, and they have this newer program that's what they train on with everybody right now is the software that we're looking to go to. But it not only does the pre-arrival, but it also does the ability for us to train on it as well. Go back and look at calls previously. And I'll have to mirror what Chief Osterman said regarding the overage. It was 155. It's now is 24 over. However, we're gonna, as we move through the year, in the public safety sales tax, which was initially passed, and continue to monitor that as we move forward.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from council? Think I have any questions? I think it's great that we're getting this upgrade done. So can I get a motion, please?
Here. I move to recommend to City Council approval of agenda item number TMP-2746, an ordinance approving the award of RFQ 2023-50 for emergency dispatch software in the amount of $179,557 and ratifying the city manager's execution of the same for all related and necessary documents.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Councilmember Hodges, second by Councilmember Edson. Can we get a roll call vote on that?
For Councilmember Hodges?
Aye.
Councilmember Edson?
Aye.
Chair Shields?
Aye.
3 ayes.
Next item on the agenda is TMP 2736, an ordinance approving a sole source agreement number 2024-17 for the purchase of license plate reading technology, camera installation, and validation through Flock Group, Inc., and authorizing the city manager to execute the same on behalf of the city.
Good evening, John Bunker, Deputy Chief, Police Department. I just want to give a brief overview. We've had mobile license plate readers for over 15 years now, but just a little explanation as far as the automated license plate readers. They've long helped law enforcement solving crimes and recovering stolen autos. ALPRs, as they're referred to, capture computer readable images of license plates, allowing officers to compare plate numbers against those of stolen cars, missing persons, and wanted persons within databases that we already have connection with, like NCIC. This puts the information in the officer's hands much quicker and allows them to be in better position to take action when needed. The information by ALPR cameras can help determine whether a vehicle was at a scene of a crime and to discover vehicles that may be associated with each other. Law enforcement agencies can choose to share their information with other agencies. Plan to do that. That's fairly common across. What what we won't do is allow for any of our information to be sold or used in any other fashion. The last piece I think I'd like to explain is with regards to our data and data collection, Flock Safety has a default that will permanently delete all of our data at the 30-day mark. So I think that's important to. I have a ton of information. I could talk about this product all day long. We're anxiously waiting to get it, but I'll leave it at that. And if y'all have any questions, I'll answer them.
No, I don't. I think this is related to an ordinance that we passed previously, and this is just the money to purchase those devices. So from my perspective, I've got all my questions answered. So thank you.
Thank you.
So just to clarify, the 30-day default delete, that would be if there's a crime or some incident, you could request certain data to be preserved, but otherwise, if that request isn't made within 30 days, it would just automatically be deleted. Is that how it generally works?
Exactly how it will operate.
Okay,
yeah.
perfect. All right, I would look for a motion.
Here. I would move to recommend to council for approval TMP-2736, an ordinance approving a sole source agreement number 2024-17 for the purchase of license plate reader technology, camera installation, and validation through Flock Group, Inc., and authorizing the city manager to same on behalf of the city.
Second. Thank you. We have a motion by Councilmember Edson with a second by Councilmember Hodges. Could we get a vote, please?
Councilmember Hodges?
Aye.
Councilmember Edson?
Aye.
Chair Shields?
Aye.
3 ayes.
All right, next item on the agenda is TMP 2728, an ordinance approving amendment number 1 to the budget for fiscal year ending June 30, 2024, as adopted by ordinance number 9704, ordinance number 9705, ordinance number 9706, ordinance number 9707, ordinance number 9708, by amending the paying classification plan for the city and full-time equivalencies for the city. Mr. Gentry.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Shields. Rick Gentry, Budget Manager. We have our first budget amendment before you this evening. We'd like to have recommended on to council. This has 2 personnel position changes in it. The first one is a job title change in development services, changing the current administration manager position to an assistant director of grants and administration. They're also reclassifying the job description and adding additional responsibilities. The person has been doing the budget and some administrative responsibilities, but they're going to add on support services and administering their grants and business license program as well down in development services. This is not an additional FTE, it's simply changing the title of position, thus requiring the updating of the pay and classification plan, as you'll see as one of the attachments. The other FTE change is in the police department. It's just on their sheet of FTEs. One of their expansion requests was an evidence technician 2, and that was part of the public safety sales tax. What we're doing is just adding it so that position is located on both their general fund sheet and their public safety sales tax sheet, so they can change those positions interchangeably. So it's not adding additional money or additional positions, just giving the flexibility of where they fund those 2 positions and where that individual falls. So the position was added with the budget when we passed that back in June. That's all. Any questions?
I think you did a great job there.
Thank you very much.
I would look for a motion.
Chair?
Yes.
I move to recommend to City Council approval of agenda item TMP-2728, an ordinance approving amendment number 1 to the budget for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024, as adopted by ordinance number 9704, ordinance number 9705, ordinance number 9706, ordinance number 9707, and ordinance number 9708 by amending the pay and classification plan for the city and full-time equivalencies for the city.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Councilmember Hodges with a second by Councilmember Edson. Could we get a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Edson?
Aye.
Councilmember Hodges?
Aye.
Chair Shields?
Aye.
3 ayes.
All right, next item is TMP 2744, an ordinance approving a 5-year support and maintenance agreement with Central Square Technologies LLC for the acquisition of software support and maintenance of the police department's computer-aided dispatch records management system, CAD RMS, mobile platform, and WatchGuard integration subscription for Central Square. Have Mr. Marsh presenting. All right.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. Steve Marsh, Chief Technology Officer.
The thing before you today is a new contract with Central Square. When we initially implemented this software 5 years ago in 2018, we started in 2018, it was with Zerker. They since merged with a larger corporation called Central Square. So there's a name change in the corporation, but not in the software. PD has been happy with the software. It took a while to get it implemented to where they were happy with all aspects of it, but we are in that position now, negotiated this agreement. We're able to negotiate down their annual increase from 5% to 4%, which in this time of inflation is actually pretty good when it comes to software maintenance. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about the software. This is what they use to track just about everything when it comes to the police department for tickets and all the records associated with their activities.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? And I would look for a motion.
Here. I move to recommend to council for approval TMP-2744, an ordinance approving a 5-year support and maintenance agreement with Central Square Technologies LLC for the acquisition of software support and maintenance of the police department's computer-aided dispatch records management system, mobile platform, and WatchGuard integration subscription from Central Square.
Second.
Yep, we have a motion by Councilmember Edson with a second by Councilmember Hodges. Could we get a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Hodges?
Aye.
Councilmember Edson?
Aye.
Chair Shields?
Aye.
3 ayes.
Thank you. All right, next item is 2023-5777, a resolution in support of Lee Summit Police Department's application for grant funding from Missouri Highway Safety Program for traffic enforcement.
Hello, thank you, Chair, Committee. Mike Murray, Captain with Lee Summit Police Department. The resolution before you is it's the annual grants that we receive from Missouri Highway Safety Program. It funds the overtime for officers to It's actually 2 grants, one's for hazardous moving enforcement, one's for impaired driving. It allows us to partner with the campaigns that they have across the state and reimburses us for their overtime costs of the officers when they participate. So it has some training and some equipment that are part of that grant we've been doing. Happy to answer any questions.
Don't have questions about this per se, but do you have police department puts out, well, you all apply for a lot of grants.
Sure we do.
Do you have somebody designated in the department, or is it just
Well, I
people?
handle this grant specifically. I manage the traffic safety grants. We have Tanisha handles some grant managers from other grants, body worn camera grants. It's just mostly specific to the people that manage that or part of that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Do you want to add anything to that, sir? Well,
John Bunker again. We don't have anyone with that job description, but as time's gone on, we have added that to one of our administrative assistants in the admin section of our department. It's really more in a testing phase, but it's a melting pot for all of our grants, but it's bigger than that. We're wanting someone to also just actively be looking for grants at the same time so that we're always looking for additional funding and to offset our budget. So yes, but nothing on an official basis. So a little bit of a pilot program for us right now.
okay, that's what I wondered. Are you taking people off the street to write grants, and is there a better way to do it, or does it need to be done in City Hall, or just
No, that's a good question. We don't take anybody off, but each one of the grants seems to be very specialized too, depending on which unit or division it comes out of. So
Sure.
the source expert's always needed, but for the background or supporting documents, it's pretty limited work from that standpoint. The real work comes with the future reporting once the grant's authorized to us,
Right.
then the constant updating and watching of dates and deadlines of that nature. So Devin, who's doing that for us now, is doing a great job. So yeah.
Okay, I was just information gathering. That's all. All right, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Further questions? I would look for motion.
All right, Chair. I move to recommend to City Council approval of item 2023-5777, a resolution in support of the Lee Summit Police Department's application for grant funding from the Missouri Highway Safety Program for traffic enforcement.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Councilmember Hodges with a second by Councilmember Edson. Could we get a roll call vote, please?
Sure. Councilmember Edson?
Aye.
Councilmember Hodges?
Aye.
Chair Shields?
Aye.
3 ayes.
That takes us to the last main item on our agenda, which is discussion of the general fund balance reserve policy. Betty Worldman, do you have a presentation for us to kick things off?
I do, a brief one, hopefully a brief one.
Sign up for that free 7-day trial. Let's see what happens.
Good idea. Okay, so we are starting into a discussion about the idea of our general fund balance and what that should be and what our reserve requirements of that fund balance should be. First, I want to clarify something that all of us, including myself, sometimes kind of refer both to the general fund balance and the fund balance reserve as interchangeable, and they're really not. And I do that as much as anybody, so I just want to clarify that. The fund balance, very generally speaking, is the difference between the city's assets and the city's liabilities, in the same way that on a personal level, it's for you, your personal equity is the difference between what you own and what you owe. There are things that are excluded. We don't typically consider like the buildings and fixed assets that the city owns in determining our fund balance because they're not readily available for liquidity purposes. The fund balance does change constantly, but we typically only measure it at specific times, very specifically at fiscal year end. The fund balance reserve, on the other hand, is the portion of the fund balance that is specifically reserved as a minimum amount that we do not want to touch except in a fiscal emergency. There are a lot of rules, accounting rules, under governmental, generally accepted accounting principles, and there's a GASB pronouncement. The Governmental Accounting Standards Board has a pronouncement, GASB 54, which addresses a lot of specifics about fund balance and how you record it. There are 5 different categories of fund balance. Some of these are not considered available for budgetary use, and those include examples of things like prepaid amounts, like prepaid insurance, for example, loans to other funds, which I'm sure you're familiar, we have several of those, payables that are on the books. There are some categories, specifically funds that are considered committed, meaning that they're basically obligated by the elected body for a specific purpose, or assigned, again, committed by the elected body for a specific purpose. Those 2 categories in particular can be measured either direction because they are decidedly committed by the elected body, but could also be unassigned or uncommitted by the elected body as well. So that's the reason why those 2 particular categories out of the 5 could be considered or not considered in determining the fund balance reserve policy. So the purpose of a reserve balance is to serve as a risk management tool during low economic cycles or during emergencies. Examples would be a recession, which we've talked about ever since I've been here, and we've not seen a bad one yet. Natural disasters, such as a tornado or something like that. A man-made disaster could be something like a cybersecurity risk, for example, cybersecurity attack that would cause us a lot of damage. Public health emergency, which we've recently seen. Public safety crisis of some kind. And changes in the political environment. And what I'm thinking of there would be more specifically grants that come from the federal and state level, and sometimes the politics for that might change, and they might have different feelings about what they want to support through those grants. What we as a body need to do is, in my thought, is a formal risk assessment. Every organization, every city, every political subdivision has different types of risks related to your revenues and your expenditures. So the first thing that we need to do is try to assess the things that are the known unknowns. We don't know what the future is going to bring, even next week, but we kind of have some idea based upon past experiences. So we go through that exercise of trying to determine what those factors might do to us, worst case scenario, best case scenario, and everything in between. But then you also have to kind of sort of try to plan for the unknown unknowns. And those are things that you cannot imagine right now would happen. You know, COVID was something that 5 years ago we really didn't anticipate to the scale that it occurred. So it's kind of interesting to try to imagine the sort of things that are basically unimaginable right now, but it's an exercise that we really should try to go through. Excuse me. Then the next step would be to try to determine the appropriate level of a fund balance reserve. So the process, again, the steps are to analyze the volatility and risks of our various revenue sources so we can look at stable revenues versus more volatile revenues as a percent of our total. I'm sure all of you know that our top revenue categories are sales tax, property tax, and our franchise fees. Sales tax is considered the more volatile of those typically because we don't know what the economic cycles will be month to month. Property tax typically is considered a fairly stable source of revenue because normally assessed values don't change that radically. We've seen that be a little different this year, of course. But the payment of property taxes is a fairly stable source because nobody wants to pay those late fees or risk getting their property sold at the courthouse steps. So property taxes is considered pretty stable. And then there are the franchise fees, which again are kind of in between. They are subject to weather patterns, but we do have stable revenue sources from those various utilities that provide those franchise fees. We also need to analyze our ability to adapt our spending needs very quickly. So if something really disastrous happened fiscally and we had a shortfall of revenue, what could we do to try to accommodate that? And of course, this fund balance reserve is the first thing that it's available for a spending need like that. But then we also need that ability to somehow recover from whatever the disaster is. And then a third part of that is to analyze the likelihood of the sort of events that would have that type of impact for us. We also should be considering other tools that we can and do use to control risk. For example, you know that we have our equipment replacement funds where we kind of use that as a savings account to set aside money to fund the replacement of major assets. Now, we haven't in recent years funded those as well as we would like to have done, but we're hoping to improve that going forward. Insurance itself, commercial insurance serves as an emergency recovery tool so that, for example, a cybersecurity attack, if that caused us a loss of revenues, even on a temporary basis, that tool could be used to help us recover from that sort of thing. And then there might also be federal and state funds available on a relief basis for whatever purpose it is that needed to be to have a gap filled. This information is coming from a white paper from the Government Finance Officers Association, and they recommend that a fund balance policy should include these elements. A defined purpose of the policy. What is it we're trying to accomplish with the policy? Secondly, consideration of the other risk management tools that I've already mentioned briefly. Third, the reserve balance as a minimum of our fund balance range. And then they also are now recommending a targeted ceiling of the fund balance range. They also recommend that we include strategies for maintaining that fund balance within that acceptable range. So what gets triggered if we drop into that fiscal emergency status, and how do we recover from that if we use the reserve? And then on the other hand, if we have balances that exceed that ceiling that we establish, then how do we decide to spend down that money and how we utilize that? We should also include the terms for when and for what purposes that reserve balance can be used. So how do you define a fiscal emergency? and what sort of things can the reserve balance be applied toward during a fiscal emergency. Typically, they also recommend a restriction on using the fund balance for recurring expenses. So we should not spend one-time money on recurring expenses that go on year after year. We can and have in the past spent down portions of the fund balance for one-time expenses, and that has been recommended often because we have had excess fund balance that we could use to do that. So that's been very useful for that purpose. We also, also, as I mentioned, need to consider non-available portions of the fund balance. So out of those 5 categories that I mentioned, 2 are definitely unavailable, 2 could be included or not included in our calculation. But then the last category is the unassigned fund balance, and that is the amount of fund balance that is totally available for spending within our budget for those one-time expenses. Now, this is a question that's been brought up several times. What role, pardon me, what role does our fund balance play in our bond ratings? As you all know, we're one of only 2 cities in Missouri that has a AAA bond rating from Moody's, and we've been very proud of that. The fund balance is an important factor, but it is not the only determining factor. The study that the GFOA did shows that Moody's ratings are very loosely associated with these percentages that I've got listed here. AAA typically has a fund balance of 35% or higher. AA is in that range of 25 to 35%, and the A rating is 15 to 25%. And of course, it goes on down from there. Moody's claims that their assigned rating is based approximately on 30% factor of the fund balance ratio. So of their overall rating, 70% of it applies to other factors, only about 30% to the fund balance. So as you can see, it's not it's not the greatest factor when you consider all the others combined. There are many other factors that can override the fund balance significance. So, let's say, for example, if instead of our rising assessed valuations, if we had decreasing assessed valuations because of blight in our community or some other reason, those kind of factors might override the large fund balance that we carry. So there are things that can swing it the other way in spite of a large fund balance. On the S&P ratings, they're a little bit less clear than the Moody's ratings, but they do follow the same rough general approach. And then finally, ratings analysts do have a fair amount of discretion in the rate setting process, so they can make their arguments both for and against a higher or a lower rating, depending on their opinions and their analysis on the data they've collected. So the implications of our bond ratings, some of these are pretty obvious. A higher bond rating results in lower interest rate costs for our bonds. We're basically able to sell our bonds for a lower interest cost. Higher debt levels make lower interest rates more impactful. So if we're going to be issuing lots of bonds in the near future, which we have plans to do over the next 10 years, then those interest rate costs that apply to those bonds is going to cost more than they would, obviously, if we were issuing fewer bonds. The third item there, longer payback periods make lower interest rates more impactful. So we're going to be paying less interest on a 3-year bond as opposed to a 10-year bond, clearly. Also, a higher bond rating kind of helps to build trust and confidence with our public, with our community. And a higher bond rating may make the city more attractive to businesses because they see a sound economic base here. So there is another side to this, though, the cost of an excessive fund balance. You can actually use the fund balance, as I just indicated, to sort of buy up that bond rating, but you do have costs to consider in relation to that. The excess fund balance does represent some opportunity costs that you're losing out on because that money is just sitting there not being utilized. It's removed from the local economy, and you could actually use that money then to provide public services that are not currently being provided. So you have to look at both sides of the coin when you're looking at that fund balance picture. So finally, the steps that, that we recommend to take would be, first, we would like for staff to do a formal risk analysis. There is a tool that the GFOA has provided that we were discussing the idea of taking it to management team and having an open discussion of all the possible scenarios, the risks that I've already talked about, and having input from all of the management team about what the considerations of these risks are and the likelihood of these things happening and how we would recover. Then we would bring that tool back and have the discussion among elected officials and staff together to do that sort of joint assessment and share the information that we built from the tool. And then we would come forward with a draft policy for consideration by the mayor and council. That's all I have. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
Thank you so much. So I thought we could kind of start with, I appreciate the presentation kind of lay some groundwork, but I wanted to talk a little bit about, why I think it's important for us to have this discussion and then see what questions or feedback the members of the committee have at this point. So the fund balance is something that we've been talking about for a long time on council. I know this has come up many times. I think Councilmember Edson was mentioning earlier that it came up on council before I was even a part of it. So I don't pretend to be a part of all of these conversations, but I know it's an important topic we've wanted to discuss. When we look at something like the fund balance, it was mentioned in the presentation that there are opportunity costs to maintaining such a large fund balance. Would you be able to pull up the general fund reserve balance calculation that you included in the packet? So I think that's helpful. Because one thing when we look at our investment policy as a city is that we only allow for very, very safe investments, which is appropriate given that we're stewards of taxpayer money. But it does mean that the investments that we make often don't keep up with the rate of inflation. So the actual spending power of the money that's in that reserve balance decreases year after year, especially when we have a high inflation environment. So it's not just that there are, services that we could have today and, we're waiting until tomorrow to get them, but it's also that there's less that we can actually buy with that money the longer we wait. So that's a big part of why I think it's important that we look at this. And as was talked about in the presentation, that maybe we talk about setting not just a floor, but a ceiling for that reserve balance so that when members of our community are paying their taxes, when they're paying their franchise fees, when they're paying their sales taxes, that they know that those funds are not just sitting around losing value, to be perfectly frank, that they're actually going to invest in our community. So that's why I wanted to start this conversation. I'm hoping that this is something that we can be thoughtful about, but also actually make a change on this year. That I know that may be kind of an aggressive timeline, but so often when these conversations go too long, we end up turning over a committee, turning over council members, and then having to start over. And so I'd really like, before this committee changes composition, that we're able to present something to the city council. Ms. Wortelman, do you think that that's a realistic timeline?
I think so, yes.
Okay. So kind of with that said, then I'd really like to hear thoughts or questions from members of the committee on where you feel like we should be going with this. If you feel like this process that was outlined in terms of staff kind of gathering information, bringing it back to us, starting to craft that policy as an overarching policy, not just saying, let's set a ceiling, but let's talk about, all the aspects of this policy, how, what factors we want to have when we consider this. That sounds appropriate to you. So I'd just open it up to any discussion or questions.
I would agree with that. And I think it'd be neat to kind of hear, once all that information comes out, if we have an excess to maybe that's over the ceiling that is set, to see, okay, where can this money go, and kind of plan for that as well. And maybe wise maneuvering with that. So thank you for your presentation too. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think from past years, and my frustration has been that we always seem to have excess in the reserve balance. And I don't understand why we have the excess, because the answer is always, well, we have this policy of 16.67, and like, okay, that's the policy. Why aren't we spending anything above that? And there's just, I guess I don't understand why we aren't. So if we want to raise the ceiling, that's fine. But to me, it feels like if we're putting money beyond that 16.67 and keeping it, it's kind of like hoarding it, you know? And I don't think that's a good look for any of us. But if we change a policy that we do have it, I like the ceiling. I like the ceiling. Could you give me an example of what that language might look like, Betty? Ceiling?
Regarding a ceiling. So it would be any amount over the designated level. Like, for example, if we establish that as a percentage, any level over, say, 35%, as just a wild approximation of what you might choose, that amount would be allocated toward providing additional services, and you could set priorities, a pecking order, so to speak, on what your spending priorities would be for that excess money. Whether it be going to a specific program or adding some sort of service or program, or going to, funding future purchase of something even. It could go into a sinking fund to buy something in the future, for example.
No, I like that idea a lot, and I think it would help with some of the conversations we've had on stormwater and moving forward with that. So, thank you.
Chair, if I may, regarding your comment about the money building up, there are a number of reasons for that. It really wasn't planned in that way. As you might imagine, I'm sure you all have had that experience with our revenues. We always predict a little on the conservative side, because if we budget to spend more money and then we don't get that, it's harder to rein things in than it is to add spending. So we always go a little bit conservative on the revenue side of it. On the spending side of it, again, we can only basically budget for recurring expenses within the budgeted revenues. And especially in recent years, we've actually had some challenges spending the budgeted money because of the supply chain issues that were coming along. Expenses did grow quite a bit on those things we did buy, so we used some of those funds available that we were not able to spend from supply chain issues to pay off other things that had grown in expense. But the supply chain issues and then the job market over the last couple of years has been very challenging to try to hire people and hire people at the pre-approved ranges that we had. So particularly in it was in the FY 22 year, I believe it was, yes, where those two things we had a double whammy, that we couldn't hire people, we couldn't get things ordered and spend the money. And so that was a big part of the reason that a lot of that money built up. So it's not something that's planned, but we do operate on a conservative basis on both sides of the coin.
No, I totally understand that. I think having that flexibility of having a range, having a floor and ceiling, and our goal is to stay within this range, and anything over that, then we're going to invest back into the community. Because frankly, people, when some service is cut off or something doesn't happen that they expected, they come out and go, well, when am I going to get my tax dollars back? And that's just not practical. So having a range, I think, is an excellent idea.
And one of the reasons why we structured the discussion this way, as opposed to coming in with a list of spending priorities right off the bat, is that we want to create a policy that's a good policy without trying to back into it by saying, wouldn't it be great if we had $20 million for this? How do we write a policy that allows us to do that? But I very much agree with both of you that that we should be investing this money back in the community if we're over our requirements, and that there's a lot of good projects, and that I think once we finalize a policy with, I hope, a ceiling in it, then it would be, asking staff to come back with a list of possible priorities, just like we do with with CIP, with other budget cycles. And I think this chart is helpful that we're looking at here. So if I'm understanding this right, our unassigned fund balance, that's the kind of the, forget exactly how you put it, but like there's no strings on that money right now.
Correct.
Is 45%. Is that right? And 35% is what it needs to be to get the AAA bond rating, approximately. Yes. I know it's not an exact science, but right. So I look at this and say, okay, there's at least a 10% increment there that ought to be spent in the community. But again, that would be, I think, a discussion for council. I think that's what I'd like for this committee and then the council to kind of decide is where should that ceiling be? Because I understand our floor of the 16.67% is, we don't necessarily want to get right down there. You don't want to be right at it, but somewhere between there and 45%, there should be a ceiling because there's no real rationale that I can see for having it that high. And but I think it's not the fault of anyone, but it is the responsibility of council to set that policy and to have that discussion. So I think this is a good first step.
Can I add something?
Please.
Yeah, well, and I can't believe I'm the one saying this, but, may also in the discussion, maybe raising that floor a little bit because, that covers 2 months of paying everybody and paying all our bills. And I know I've talked to Brian Head enough when he was in Joplin and they had the tornado. Boy, 2 months is cutting it close. And those are the kind of things you really, really cannot see coming. So that might be worth part of the discussion too, is whether or not to raise that a little bit. Thank you.
Here, I will also add, we've initiated a survey of metro area communities to see what ranges, and we will share that with you once we get all that collected.
Excellent. All right. I think that kind of covered most of the points that I had wanted to hit. Was there anything else that anybody wants to discuss today? So when do you think we'd be able to see the next step in this process? Can you go back to that slide talking about what you think the order of operations would be for this?
These steps, is that what you're referring to? Okay.
So how much time do you need to prepare this analysis and then come forward with some kind of a framework to guide that discussion, about minimums and maximums and policy parameters?
So I think the first step is to share this analysis tool with management team and probably give them at least a week to peruse that and give some thought to the details that are in it. They have a lot of expertise that they'll be able to contribute to the whole process. And then maybe, I don't know when we can get this on the agenda for management team, but probably no sooner than about a week to 10 days away, maybe 2 weeks. And so then we could bring all that information back to another discussion here. Or if you wanted, I don't know if you prefer to do it through Finance and Budget Committee, that generalized discussion that's in step 2 here.
So do you think that the September Finance and Budget Committee meeting, I think it's going to be September 6th, would be enough time to bring that back?
I think so, yes.
Unless any members of the committee object, I think it'd be appropriate to bring that back here and then discuss it and then hopefully send it to council after that. Sounds great to me.
Very good.
Thank you. All right. Well, that was a great discussion. Thank you so much, Ms. Wordleman, for putting together those slides. I know you did that on a very quick turnaround, and I very much appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
All right. So next item is roundtable. Do we have any roundtable items? Yes.
Can I just say, I never have this many staff members come to my CEDC meetings. So, we're meeting Wednesday at 5 if y'all want to come.
I promised him a song and dance. That's just to trick him to come in. So.
Well, you do have a couple of new staff members. Is that right? Do you want to introduce?
Yes, I'd like to. Thank you. So we have Tiffany Morowick. Did I say that right? Morowick? Yeah, close enough. Tiffany is our new Deputy Director over cash and debt and came to us from the Gardner-Edgerton School District where she was Chief Financial Officer, right? Okay. And then previously worked in Texas and also in Massachusetts before going to Kansas. And then next we have Holly Allen, who is our Assistant Director Controller. Holly's a CPA, and she most recently worked for Oklahoma University as the Assistant Controller for the Health Sciences Department of Oklahoma University. Did I get all that right? Okay, very good. And they're just jumping in and doing a great job. We're very excited to have them both on staff.
Welcome again to the city. Do we have any roundtable items from the committee? I just had one. So I had a gentleman reach out to me actually today, so it's very timely, about the bid process for city contracts for small businesses, and that he had wanted to bid on some services for the city and had trouble negotiating that system and figuring out when to place the bid or how to do it. And I don't want to grill anyone about that specific bid. He may contact me with some more details and I'll pass them along. But I just wanted to ask, is there anything to help, especially local businesses, small businesses, figure out those systems? I know they can be a little difficult if you're not well versed in them.
We use an online process called public purchase that is set up specifically for accepting bids for governmental bodies. And that process does require a certain amount of technology background and access to technology, which sometimes makes it a little more difficult for the smaller mom and pop types of businesses to participate. But we have done outreach and try to work with local businesses to make it work for them. So what I would recommend, I mean, you can certainly share with us what you find out, but that person probably needs to get in touch with our procurement staff to discuss options on what they're interested in and what they might be able to, what we might be able to do to assist them in participating.
And again, I don't know exactly what happened here. It sounded like he had spoken with someone in that office and just been told to use the online system, and then hadn't been able to figure it out, hadn't been able to find out when that particular contract was coming up. So I just wondered if there's, especially if we get outreach like that, what's a good person to direct them to who could maybe help them navigate that software, or is there anything in particular that would be good to provide to someone in that situation?
So right now our acting procurement manager is Dee Dee Shearhart, who's been with the city for a number of years. And she would be the right person to try to assist with that. I will be glad to mention to her that someone is specifically interested and will be trying to get in touch with her.
Thank you. That's all that I have. Meeting is adjourned at 4:53. Thank you, everyone.